This is Swordai, a medieval PvPvE extraction game with high skill directional combat. Think Dark and Darker merged with Mordhau or Chivalry. And as many of you know, this is the type of extraction game I've been waiting for. And I was fortunate enough that the game's developer was willing to come on the podcast with myself and Scotty Games and talk game philosophy and design. I think you guys are going to find the discussion super engaging. And you get into so many more details with indie developers than a AAA studio would ever give you about the process. All right, so let's get into it. I'm very excited for this game and for what it means for the genre. All right, welcome Knights of the Square Tablet episode. We have no idea, joined as always by my co-host Scotty Games, and we got a special treat for you guys because we have an indie developer on, Alex, who is coming out with a brand new medieval slasher game. What's going on, Mr. Alex?
Hey guys, I'm super psyched to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm just psyched to tell you guys about my game, chat about melee slashers and game history, kind of get into it.
So I only heard about this game because they literally sent me keys to my business email, and I was like, oh my God, this looks right up my alley. I'm sold. Usually the games I get in my business email are scary. But tell us a little bit about the game.
Yeah, I'd say the high level elevator pitch is take the combat you'd find melee slasher combat like Mordhau and Chivalry, combine it with kind of extraction looter gameplay like you'd find in something like Dark and Darker, add a little bit of like MMO flair into that, and action RPG, skill trees, loot, and that's swordai.
Awesome. And that's a game that me and Scotty have both been gunning for because we were Dark and Darker players who didn't love the combat. So,
yeah, looking for a little bit more depth out of the combat from Dark and Darker.
100%.
Yeah. So is it Sword Eye or Sword AI?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a funny story. I started coming up with a name and brainstorming the game just a little bit before like ChatGPT, Midjourney came, and AI kind of became this, mainstream popular term everyone's talking about. So at the time, I thought the name was a little bit subtle. AI is really important to me. A lot of my background is in AI and other outside of gaming, other applications. And, I've been a programmer for most of my life. So I always had felt like one of the things that was actually missing from directional combat games and slashers was like good quality NPCs that made the PvE feel fun and dynamic. I think that's also really important to bridge casual players so they can learn versus NPCs, feel like they're gaining loot, getting a little better, and not just, day one of Mordhau, you're just getting murdered by people with 1,000 hours. There's not a great kind of bridge into the regular gameplay. So I wanted to make it an important part of the game, but it's not like you're using ChatGPT to build swords or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
traditional AI techniques like, games have used for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's awesome. As I said, we were people who love the extraction and the slasher genre, but we were a little turned off by the biggest one in the genre with Dark and Darker, the combat not as complex. So this is something that sounds super amazing to us. Could you just explain like how the combat system is going to be in Sword Eye?
Yeah, sure. So it is directional combat with directional blocking. It's a held block, not a timed block. So one of the things I played around with is I made a test bed version where I could just turn things on and off. Like, is it timed parry? Is it directional parry? Are there kicks? Are there stuns? Are there chambers? Are there not? And I got together with some of the friends I've met in other melee slashers, and I've been really lucky. I was just hopelessly bad, like absolutely terrible at the first slasher I played. And I ran into a few guys who played competitive Civ 1 and just have thousands of hours in basically every slasher. And they kind of took me under their wing and taught me everything I know. And so I'm pretty good at most of these games now. And we just get together and we'd go over the timing of the swings. We'd think about what's fun, what's not, and kind of start taking things out. And so what I really settled on, what I think is the most fun, is actually I think directional blocking just feels so good when you do it well. And the main problem with it is it has a very high skill floor. So I've done a lot to work on that, but it's directional blocking. Held block, I actually don't think the time parry is my favorite thing. I know a lot of people really like it, but I think there's a few issues you run into with time parry around ping, around spacing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has kicks, which I think are really important for any held block game. You have to be able to overcome the held block, so it has kick stuns. And then the other game that really inspired me was Guild Wars 1, which had a whole slew of abilities. And it had like hundreds of abilities, but you could only slot in 8. And Swordai has a similar thing to that. There's a big pool of abilities, but you have a pretty limited pool that you can slot in. But
Yeah,
they
I
can
found it
really change the
interesting.
combat style.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I found it interesting that you could like take the kick out if you even wanted to. Like it's a
Yeah.
skill. So there's like I don't know, what is it, a 8x8 square or something like that of the skills that you can select from that you kind of unlock at the moment. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. So like if the kick is like super important for like held block combat, like and having that as a skill, is there any other skills to also sort of overcome held block
Yeah.
that's different from kick?
Yeah. So there's a few other kind of subtle things I made that I think really shifted the combat. So it's also a charged attack. So you hold down,
Mm-hmm.
charge up, deal more damage. And one of the other abilities you can use is Ki, which is like a shout
Yeah.
that charges your attack to full instantly. And so the held block combined with the charged attack, you really do need kick to get around blocks. But with the Ki, you can attack instantly if you want to. And so you can run Ki. I think if you're actually not running kick, you're usually doing some kind of more defensive utility sort of build where you're helping someone out. Most people are running kick.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Yeah,
meta
yeah.
may change, and I'm always thinking of new things to slot in there. So like in terms of like alternates for kick, I've been thinking about some ideas around like something that's hyper mobile where you just get behind them to hit them. So maybe some kind of like leap or dash, something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
my goal is really to you know give people the option to kind of set up a loadout that lets them almost play a little bit of their favorite melee slasher. So like there actually is an ability that's a timed block,
Oh, okay.
and there's
Yeah,
an
that's
extra
interesting.
reward for it. So you can augment your block to be a timed block, and if you succeed, there's kind of like a big payoff, and if you fail, it's not good. Um, if you don't like hits, I don't. There's no hit stuns, so you can, uh, you know, keep fighting as you get hit. But there is a upgrade you can take that makes your Ki attacks hit stun people when you use them, and it increases the cooldown of your Ki. So there's a lot of kind of trade offs and balance like that I think are part of my vision of really keeping things fresh. Is each run you can try and dip your loadout. You get owned by some guy with these other skills. You kind of want to try them out yourself, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's awesome.
No, I love the addition of the skill tree and stuff, and adding some variety. Is that going to be like kind of how Dark and Darker has the abilities, and it's just going to merge that with a little bit more of a skill gapped melee combat?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I'd say one of the other big differences between Dark and Darker and what I was saying about that kind of MMO flair is, what I really kind of wanted to capture. I think some of my like favorite gaming moments of all time are like big dungeon runs, not with tons of people, just like deep into dungeons and PvP MMOs with loot, where you've got all this loot, you work so hard for it, you run to another party in the dungeon, you're fighting to the death. Only one person makes it. I wanted to capture that feeling a little bit. And so the other thing that's pretty different about Dark and Darker versus Swordai is the dungeon is actually a one persistent map um, that is distributed across servers. And so as you go into the dungeon, there's red portals that take you deeper, and there's white portals that take you out with your loot. And so at any given point in time, you can say like, oh, I want to take this white portal out, or I want to dig deeper and
Yeah,
go to a red portal.
I wanna risk it all.
You
I
want to
wanna
risk it
keep
all.
Okay, so like every level you have the ability to go out. So you pretty much win like at every level and you can, you know, take your loot, go back and sell or whatever, come back in, but you would start kind of at the base of this tower.
Yeah, or you can
Okay.
double down, go through the red portal, and there's no queue. There's no. It's just one persistent world. You go in. Maybe there's 10 people
Oh,
in. Maybe there's nobody,
that's
and
actually really
there's
nice. Yeah.
there's distributed servers. So like, if the first zone is full, it just spawns up another version of the first zone. It is instance, but it holds a lot of people, 30, 40, 50 people, depending on the zone.
Oh wow.
And then when you go through a red portal, you'll go to all the other people who've made it to zone two. And again, those could be multiple servers or just one. And it keeps going until you reach the final boss. And
Yeah, so so
yeah,
it's not gonna feel like you're queuing in, like everyone's in that inn in Dark and Darker in the beginning, and then
yeah,
they go in. It's more like you can always enter this thing that exists and keep climbing it,
exactly. Yeah.
and it's like a persistent kind of thing that exists in the world that you go to, maybe.
So you could get in later than a
Okay.
team.
Yeah, you
Like
can get
they
them
already
later,
start a
and they'll have
dungeon,
killed a lot of the monsters, so you'll like probably catch up to them because you'll be faster
run
than
up
them.
on them and take their stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So how much does gear sort of play into uh, the combat and like is somebody gonna just outgear you all the time, or obviously you're going for some skill based stuff with having
Yeah.
a much better combat system, but there's always that question of how powerful is the loot you're gonna get.
Yeah, so this is something I put a lot of thought into because I got super frustrated by games that got this wrong. And I think it really comes down to risk versus reward, and it's actually a pretty complicated question. So, like, if you make the super hard to get loot actually barely give you an edge in combat at all, then the risk for reward isn't very favorable to the person who has that good loot. Someone just goes in with no gear, they're risking nothing. You're risking your, sword of awesomeness. And if it only is giving you a 2% edge, you're not even going to want to bring the sword of awesomeness into the dungeon. That doesn't feel good because when you win, you get basically nothing. And when you lose this thing you worked really hard for. On the flip side, when you go in and you just get one shot by, or you're hitting some guy for 0 because he has ridiculous armor or something, that's not fun either. And so there is a balance, and I think what I am really aiming for is to make sure that the kind of risk to reward feels right at each layer. So if you go in with nothing, you're not risking any gear, you go in naked basically, and you run into someone who's, wielding a sword that took them 10 hours to get, you're going to need to skill check them super hard to beat them. It's not going to be impossible, but it's not going to be like a 60-40 if you're even skilled. It's going to be like you need to just be way better than them. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that Swordai has is like if you block an attack, you take no damage. One of my core design philosophies is there's never guaranteed damage. If you're at 1 HP and no matter how good gear they have and what abilities they have, there's no way for them to do that last damage except to get through your block. So you can always mitigate the gear discrepancy by just blocking everything. But in terms of like damage multiplier, roughly I kind of think about things as like there's 4 tiers. You go in naked, you go in with like easy to acquire, but you actually put in some effort. You'll be a little sad if you lose it. Up to like tier 4 is like, I worked really hard to get this. You should always be able to fight up 1 tier. That should only take like a moderate skill gap. 2 tiers should take a serious skill gap. And 3 tiers should be like the person had to, like maybe they had to fall asleep a little bit at the keyboard. Or something. Like it's got to be a
Somebody had to
massive.
either god game or the other guy
Yeah.
fell asleep at the wheel. Okay.
And that's more for like you killing them. I think I'm totally fine with even a naked player being very difficult to kill if they're just really good.
Yeah, it's
But
like
I don't-
Mordhau, where when you were bad and you would load in and someone would just kill you with a frying pan and they're
Yeah,
like naked running around.
I think I've seen games that make the error on both ends of the spectrum, and for Mordhau it's fine because Mordhau isn't trying to make you care about loot and care about
right.
beating
This
bosses
is more
in PvE.
punishing, so you have
But
to be
yeah,
careful.
this is more. If you're good, you can get the weak gear to get up to that tier 1, tier 2, and then you'll be able to beat the people at the top tier. But you're not going to go and naked risk nothing and
Right.
1v5 people either. It's kind of in between those two.
No, that sounds great to me because I think that's where some of the games in the genre kind of lack right now is that a lot of the fights are a little bit more of a number check, but you want to feel like you at least have a chance. Like
Yeah.
if you're good enough that like my favorite part of Dark and Darker was always just the longsword parries. I feel like that's the highest skill gap and that
Yeah.
always feels good. But a lot of the rest of the game feels like if I go in geared up to the teeth, I'm just two-shotting people. And that's not as fun, but at the same time, the other way, it's not fun if you're just getting one shot left and right too.
Yeah, so I tried to really find that balance, and the other dimension you can play with a little bit is when you're fighting in a dungeon, you can be creative. There's a lot of not skill, but like ability to manipulate the map, just knowledge of the map, knowledge of the game. Even if you don't have good gear, if you can kite an NPC onto someone, the NPC can kill them.
Yeah.
You can make tricky jumps and get away that other people can't follow. I really tried to like design the maps with a lot of hidden chests, hidden traps, hidden rooms.
Okay,
kiteability,
so
stuff like
yeah,
that.
is there going to be any procedural generation though, or is it going to be like how Dark and Darker they kind of put these puzzle pieces together to kind of make the map? Sometimes I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they still do that. So you're kind of is it going to be a set map every time?
So I played around with this for a while, and I couldn't get the procedural generation to feel as dynamic as I wanted to.
It's tough, yeah. Yeah.
And I also really, really love games where deep knowledge of the map pays off. And I think you lose that a little bit when the map is random. So I went a bit of a different route. The maps are just really big and a little complicated and maze-like. And you start in different spots of them. And then when I mentioned that kind of, you start in a tier 1 area and you go through a red portal, you go to a tier 2 area, and you go through a red portal, you go to tier 3 area.
Yeah.
There's different tier 1 areas and there's different spawn points within them. So there's a lot of different places that you can start. And so I think you can maintain that freshness just by having a big varied map with a lot of different paths without going the procedural generation route, and you get that feeling of a handcrafted map. The other thing I put a fair amount of effort into is all the spawns and stuff are randomized. So there's, in a given room, there's a chance no monster will spawn. There's a chance different monsters will spawn. So you get a bit of a fresh feeling from those varied spawns as well. So yeah,
Awesome.
no
Yeah.
procedural generation at all is what I ended up on.
Okay, nice.
No, that's cool. And you said there was going to be 40 people possibly in the dungeon. So how big are the chances that you're going to run into people, would you say?
Pretty big. So one of the the most of the red portals require that you don't just get there, but that you have a blessing that you got by killing a boss, something like that. And so if you get to the red portal and the boss is dead, you wait for the boss to respawn. The respawn's pretty quick. But that does tend to mean that people, while you're waiting, someone else comes up. Most of the time you're going to run into people. And I tried to make the game totally as close to 50-50 as possible in terms of whether it's worth killing them or working with them. And so some of the feedback I've gotten in the playtest so far is actually that too many people are just working together because everyone wants to see deeper into the dungeon, and the NPCs are so challenging that they tend to find we'll work together, we'll get more than double the loot in total versus I kill you now and take what you have on you. I think as I add a little bit more reasons to go around backstabbing people, that's going to shift and we'll hit more of that 50-50 balance. But I'd say in the most recent playtest, there was about 1,000 people who tried out the game, and you almost certainly would run into someone, but a lot of times they'd cooperate with you, or you'd kind of feel bad because they'd want to, but you'd kill them anyway and take their stuff.
Yeah.
It was not the murder fest that many people would expect, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like in a playtest it might be different as well because people are like they want to see everything but that's super interesting. So like, are there any plans for like classes or anything like that, like that don't just use a sword, like maybe like wizards or anything that branches away from just directional combat? Or
Yeah, so to some degree, but I think the directional combat's going to be fundamental. I don't think if you're not willing to get in there and mix it up at least a little bit, probably it's not the game for you. Like
right
there, and I definitely also won't go with like
No archery. Love to hear it.
no archery. No.
I was thinking maybe if there's archery, you could like parry.
You could
like,
whack that. Yeah,
you could like.
So there are spells and they're targeted. So like there's a spell that shoots a frost bolt at someone, but it slows them. It doesn't damage them. It's a utility type stuff. Mm-hmm. Or there's conditional things where if you hit them with your sword and then you shoot them with a spell, something happens. But you have to be willing to get in there and mix it up with your sword. And part of that is coming a bit from a balance standpoint. I think part of it also is from a design standpoint. It's tricky to make being an archer not miserable without making everybody hate the archers.
Yeah.
And like, I think I'd rather just go all in and be like, this is a game for people who want to get in there and swing their sword around. And if that's not what you're going to do, like, totally cool, but probably not your game. And
no, that's whatever. Right up our interest group.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like the arrows, and so I'm assuming you're gonna have teams of 3 or 4 people, and there's gonna be a lot of build diversity in how you build your teams, and I feel like that's where a lot of the skill trees are gonna come in. Is that
so I definitely had Guild Wars 1 kind of front of mind when I was thinking about the skill tree, and I loved their 8v8 guild versus guild mode. And the way it worked, I forgot how many skills they had, but it was a ton. It was like 300 skills, more than I'm going to have. And when you'd get together with your guild and try and come up with like what all 8 of you had, it almost reminded me of building like a deck in Magic the Gathering or something. You're like, we need this skill to go with that skill, but sometimes there'll only be 2 people together, so we need, to be able to break into groups of 2 and still have good combat effectiveness and stuff. And that was kind of what I had in mind when I was working on some of the skills. I don't think they're quite there yet. I don't have quite enough variety. And for the initial batch of skills, I really want to make sure that like, anyone could have a good solo experience. So they are a little bit more solo focused and a little less synergistic than what I plan to add in later, if that makes sense. But there's no teams, so it's totally free for all. You can get together 3 friends and you can go in at the same time. And if one of them decides they want to murder you, that's up to them. There's friendly fire. There's no, damage turning off. You can heal the NPCs. You can be you can grief as much as you want.
You can heal the NPCs.
So someone's fighting a boss and you can just keep healing them until they die.
Keep healing them until the person comes and kills you.
Man, that's hilarious. Yeah. That's awesome.
So I've gotten some requests for a co-op mode, a non-PvP mode. And I can't do that right now because I don't have any way to deal with stopping people from griefing you except that you can kill them. That's the counter to griefing is you will kill them if they're griefing you. And so there can't be a co-op mode because you have to be able to kill the people who are misbehaving. So I'm still thinking about other options for that, but that's kind of the game design is it's you can be as creative as you want. It's totally open-ended. There's no set teams. You can work together, but you don't have to. You can betray people or not, and that's the.
I love when their games have stuff like that because I think that's what makes games so like every interaction can be unique. You could play the game 1,000 times, and every time you go in, something crazy and different could happen. And I think that's what keeps people coming back in a lot of games. Like as we're primarily chivalry too, but after 3 years, you've kind of seen everything that's going to happen. I feel like sometimes in these games with high stakes and players can get as creative as they want with the interactions. You can play for years and always see something different.
That's like completely my hope, and I think it's also a good way to make friends. Like, you run into someone who you've seen a few times, and you decide I've even made friends in kind of PvP MMO type games where for a long time we just murdered each other and started to hate each other a little bit, and then became friends later. Like, I think those kind of interactions, are what kept me coming back to some of my favorite games.
Yeah, is there going to be?
Is there going to be Void?
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
Probably
Void.
asking the same.
There isn't now, but yes, it's 100% on the feature list, and I think it's like kind of essential to making. Like some people see that as like an accessory feature, and I think in a lot of games it is, but for me, it's actually like the social interactions that I want to have happen need VoIP to actually happen. So
I agree. I've played bad games that have great social interactions, and you wind up having a good time, even though the everything else is trash about the game.
Yeah, here's another thing I've been burning to ask is like, this is gonna be sort of like a sweaty game, from what I've played, but you are taking cool kind of steps, especially with like the tutorial and the little ball that you have to hit that floats around that kind of trains you how to play directional combat games. I think that's a great step in the direction of kind of maybe bringing people into the genre. Do you have any more plans to maybe take that to the next level, or what's your concerns with what kind of players you're going to attract, and is there any room for casuals?
That was incredibly important to me. So I got into directional combat late, just due to life. I wasn't gaming much, like when Mordhau came out. I played a little bit of Civ 1, then I wasn't gaming much. I got back into it, and the first game I played was Mortal Online 2, and that was like the first directional combat game I took seriously and got good at. And when I first started, I was so bad, just like completely hopeless, like not like the average player. I was like the guy where you're like, hopefully he's got some kind of injury or something. And I happened to like stumble across some a guild who had a few, former competitive Civ 1 players who are like absolute sweats. And they would sit around in their, guild hall and just one person would attack and one person would block. And they do that for like hours, just like systematic, like I'm going to do overheads over and over and over at you until you can be like telling me about your day and watching that YouTube video and blocking overheads because it just is complete muscle memory out of the corner of your eye. You see the animation, you do it. And I got quite good, and I felt like the genre is just so rewarding when you reach a certain level where it feels like your sword is like an extension of yourself and it's doing what you want, and the weapon is like you feel like you're in the game in a way that other combat games just never gave me. Even games I really like Dark Souls, I felt
it's
like I was
almost a
telling
sense
a guy
of
to slow.
immersion, isn't it? Like
Absolutely, yeah.
you feel like you're your character at that point. Yeah.
I always said these games are addicting because it's just the reward of constantly being able to improve. You could play 1,000 hours in these games and still be like, oh, I messed up there. I didn't do this. I should have done this more. And that to me has always been the addicting part of the slashers.
100%. And so because I had that journey of going from like absolutely terrible to at least like good but not like elite, I got to see like what it took me to get there, and I thought pretty hard about like what would have needed to be in the game to that would have made that easier for me. So the orbs you mentioned in the tutorial, I took a lot of inspiration from like actual martial arts training. So there's a later section where there's what are called katas coming after martial arts, where there's levels that have the orbs in specific positions that are constant, and there's a timer and a song, and you can play it over and over, and you just hit a button to restart if you make a single mistake, and your goal is to like get a perfect run with perfect timing. And to actually do that, you actually have to hit every block and combo every attack and kind of really deeply learn the mechanics. And there's a sequence of them that get harder and harder as you go. And then, I put in one of the early benchmarks is called the initiation trial, and it has NPCs that attack you and you have to block. And the better you block, the harder they attack you, and they just keep ramping up. And same for you dealing damage. I was pretty surprised to learn. I thought the blocking would be the hard part. What I have in game really teaches people to block. They learn. I'm like shocked now when I play someone who just said like I came from Darker and Darker. I've never played a directional combat game, but I went through the training and like spent 20 minutes with a block trainer. They're pretty good. The dealing damage is actually where they have problems. One of the other little mini games I put in game to help people learn it is just a training dummy that stands there, and you have 6 seconds to do as much damage to him as you can, but you can't hit him from the same direction twice. So and you can only use 6 attacks. So you can do 1 attack from each of Swordai's 6 directions. And if you combo them all and like headshot them all and fully charge them all, you have just enough time to do like 300 damage. And most new players struggle to get 100 damage. Like it's a pretty massive difference between, Swordai isn't fully physics based, but it has like, there's a sweet spot to your animation. You want to hit him with about in the middle of your swing. It knows which point on your sword you hit with. So you want to hit about 2/3 of the way down the blade. If you hit with the handle, you do like no damage. You need to hit all your combos.
Headshots are 10% more damage.
Headshots are 25% more, so it's actually fairly significant. Yeah, and I feel like I've gotten through teaching new players to block. The game also has a feature called Block Assist that like nudges your input in the direction you probably mean to block, but you wouldn't want if you're an expert because it's weird in 1v2. But I don't have that same thing for attack assist, and so that's actually one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is like, how do I help new players like hit with the middle of your sword? And I think it's almost like what you're saying with that immersion. It feels like you're holding a sword, and you imagine handing a sword to somebody who's never held one and saying like, go hit stuff.
Go do 300 damage.
They wouldn't do very well. They'd miss a lot. They'd hit with the wrong part of the blade. They'd hit with the flat part. Like, there's a lot that can go wrong. But yeah, making that accessibility was really important to me, and that was part of why that I mentioned at the start that the AI was so important to me. Is I think one way you really can learn is you see what the AI does, and you fight it over and over, and you see what works against it. And so I really made the AI in the game progress. Every NPC has a purpose of like, this guy just spams attacks, and he's supposed to teach you that you block and then riposte, and you block and riposte, and you block and riposte, and just get muscle memory for that. There's another guy that blocks really well, but is just terrible at stop blocking if you're kicking. And he's designed to teach you that you make him block with an attack, and then you kick him, and then you hit him. And so that's kind of the other dimension of it is like, I think the NPCs in the dungeon can almost be like combat trainers kind of guiding you on your sword journey as you go.
Yeah, and so you said you mentioned AI training for, or like AI in the way the NPCs fight. Do they like sort of learn a little bit about your playstyle as you fight them? Because a problem I have with some games is sometimes it seems like to make difficulty, they sort of make the NPCs have input reading or like stupid things that I don't feel like is fair, and that's been a big
Yeah.
problem with me getting into PvE games that even like KCD, right? Kingdom Come Deliverance kind of felt a little off to me, at least the first one. Maybe the second one's going to be way better, but
I'm super hyped for the second.
yeah.
I
But
am too, actually. Yeah. I
so
hope
can you
so.
go a little bit more into depth on how you're sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
making difficulty? I know you kind of touched on it, but
No,
maybe
no.
you can
I
expound on
love
it.
to rant about this stuff. So yeah, if anything, you'll need to cut me off.
Yeah.
So the one of the like core things I started with from the very start is like the AI should have the same rules as a player. So like I played games in the past where the AI swings, even if you step out of range, its sword will like teleport to you or get longer. Somehow the NPC just they can't swing and miss basically. And or the AI never has to worry about its stamina; it never stams out. In swordai, that's not the case. Like the AI has to decide what angle its body should be at. It can turn its head, it can accelerate its swing, but it's by like saying where it wants to be looking. It has a stamina bar. If it runs out of stamina, then it stands there with no stamina and can't do anything. Like it's blocked by all the same things that you are. And so one of the kind of goals I had was that you should be able to tell which enemy you're fighting, even if the skin is off. So I load them up with the default Unreal 5 skin, and I fight them, and I expect that you should be able to say, like, this is a this guy or this is a that guy. And so no individual NPC is learning from you, like, mid-fight, but it will try and mix it up. If it's losing, it'll be like, I should shift from strategy A to strategy B because this isn't working. So there is some of that. There's no input reading, but it's not like it's doing machine vision to like actually watch your
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
So it kind of has a rating of how good it thinks your feint was, and it uses that to decide how likely it is to block wrong. So it's not like, it's not perfect or anything, but I think
So it
if
kind of evaluates you in real time a little bit. That's what I'm trying to
yeah
get at. Like,
yeah it does,
it's
yeah.
like
And
scanning you.
I
And
think
then,
if you if you get through the game, uh, the end level AIs do feel like you're fighting a person a little bit. Like just some examples of like really simple stuff. They'll evaluate if there's multiple players. They'll try and keep all the players in a straight line with their footwork constantly. They don't just like target switch based on aggro. If they block, they'll look if there's someone else they could riposte into, depending on how tough they are. So like the easy, one of the mistakes I made, I'd say, in one of the early playtests was I was like so excited about my AI that I made some of the early NPCs like totally unreasonably hard in hindsight. But I
yeah.
didn't see it because I fought them a million times, and so you have to get into the game. The early NPCs, they stand there and they whack at you, and if you block and riposte, you'll kill them. And that's designed to teach you that like the tempo of the game is really riposte driven. That's probably like the way swordai's initiative is driven, is with tempo, or with riposte rather.
Will there be like a variety of different swords in the game where you can like use different advantages from the weapons, or are we mostly just going?
Yeah, so I am working on the gear system now, and I just put in like the first gear item, which is a healing flask, and there's varieties of those. So there's like one that gains charges when you kill another player. There's one that gains charges when you go through a red portal, so you go
It's
deeper
like
in the
Path of
dungeon.
Exile classes.
Yeah,
Flask
stuff like
almost.
that. The
Cool.
next one is going to be swords, and so already in game there are different sword models. So there's longer ones and shorter ones. Most of the longer ones have bigger cross guards, so you have to worry quite a bit more about handle hits with them. And they also have different damage profiles. Like one of them has a big leather ricasso on the lower part of the blade. If you hit with that lower blade, it doesn't do as much damage. But I want to add swords that have a bit more impact on your actual fighting style. So ones where it takes longer for your attack to charge, but when it charges, it does more damage. Enchantments on swords where you get like a stamina refund when you block. That are designed to be more defensive, stuff like that.
What
So
about
I
like
want to have like
axes? Are there going to be axes, flails? I know
no.
you can't do flail,
So
but like
there are NPCs that use other weapons. So
yeah.
the lore for the game is based on I'm gonna mess up the pronunciation because it's a Chinese word, but Xianxia, which is like that plus wuxia is kind of like mythological Chinese martial arts super power kind of would be the fantasy. And a common trope in those books is that some, you know, ancient, super powerful swordsman sets up a trial to find the next best swordsman and builds a
Interesting.
sequence of
Yeah.
adventures for them. And if you complete them, you get to be his apprentice, or maybe like he's dying and he leaves you his stash. So that's kind of the motivation for the game. Is it's like to find the ultimate swordsman. And I have vaguely considered like maybe you can become a heretic and like pick up a spear and fight with it, something like that. But for now,
You
swords
get
are the
minus
focus.
you get minus damage or something though for not using a sword.
Yeah. But there are NPCs in games. There's like guys that fight with ice claws. There's guys that fight with daggers. There's golems that whack you and stuff like that. But I don't know. I'm always a big believer in like do one thing really well. And I think for swordai, the variety is going to come from the abilities. I think in something like mordhau, like at some point you get sick of like you're just feeling a little frustrated or something. You're like, oh, I'm going to switch weapons, and it brings a bit of new breath and freshness to the game, and I love
Right.
that. But I think in swordai, you're going to get that from changing up your skills and your loadout. You don't need to also switch your weapon. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting.
No, that's incredible. I'm actually so excited to hear how much like thought and stuff is in the and planning is in this game. It seems like you're so passionate. How long have you been working on it? Because it seems like you have so much like down already.
Yeah, so I started working on it, like working 2 years ago. I probably started like brainstorming 2.5 or 3 years ago, and I started like internally griping about how the sort of games that I was playing could be better, like
Yeah.
20 years ago or something like that. No, I started seriously working on it about 2 years ago. I have been a software developer, my entire life, so a good 25 years at this point. So I have a lot of coding expertise, but I'm fairly new to game development, and this was like my first major attempt at something. And so one of my kind of core, beliefs is that I think I also need feedback from players. So I've been really focused on having playtests. The very first playtest I did, I posted on the Mordhau subreddit. There was no graphics in the game. You're in a black void. You're the default Unreal Manny is what they call him, the mannequin. And the people in the Mordhau subreddit are awesome. I got like at least 100 people to come try out the game. Most of them told me the controls were trash, and a few of them stuck around, and we had some good battles. I think like one of the most hype moments in a duel that I've clipped is like two people both playing as Manny in this black void with no graphics, but some guy does like a feint into a spinning jump kick and kicks someone in the face and stuns them, and it's like totally epic.
Yeah.
And so I went and I spent less than a year on the game at that point, 10 months, just to get something where like people could really fight and it felt good to me. And it turned out if you were coming from Mordhau controls, it didn't feel good for most people. So I worked super hard on the controls, iterated on that, did another playtest a few months later, and so at this point, I've been working about 2 years, but I think according to Steam stats, looks like about 1,500 people have played the game for a total of 4,000-ish hours. So there's a fair amount of most of the playtests are only a few weekends, but there's been people who get into it and they play 10 hours in a weekend or something. There's been people who hate it and they tell me why. There's been people who hate it and they don't tell me why, and I wish they would actually. And I'm just kind of constantly trying to iterate it and make it better. And that's also what gives me motivation to work on it, is like seeing people just enjoying what you made, or even not enjoying it, but having like a good insight into how it could be better is like so powerful.
Yeah.
Well, my first takeaway with it was as an indie game that came out of nowhere to me, I was like, it works really well. Everything seems highly functional. It doesn't feel clunky. Everything felt really smooth, which is not the case for a lot of the slashers in development. I've tried many of them behind closed doors. And I was like, oh, we might have something here.
I think you got to thank the Mordhau subreddit. It's the reason it feels that way today is because of that early feedback of all the parts that didn't. And I still just last week I had someone coming from Mortal Online 2 has like a weird alternate control scheme where WASD also controls your block direction.
Hmm.
So you like backstep and then hit block and it blocks down, or you move forward. I'd never really used that control scheme much, but she was like,
I think Gloria Victis had that too.
I always played mouse, so yeah, I never got into it, but she was like, here's exactly how it needs to work. Like, here's the little details. Here's the things that actually could be better that they didn't do. And like, I took her feedback, and now it's in game.
Yeah,
That's kind
yeah.
of
There's
that's
always
that's
like a
like
few people that have that control scheme. I feel like I think Shiv
yeah,
even has that, but like
It
I've
does
never
have
understood that.
directional attack or something where you move in a direction and you
Yeah,
attach from. Yeah, yeah, it
yeah,
does.
in
it's like
Mortal, there's
directional
some
attack.
people who are like really good. I don't think they use it exclusively. I think they use it as like a hybrid, so they'll have it on like just their down block and just their overhead
Yeah.
attack, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And usually you do want to backstep when someone's stabbing you, and usually you do want to step for like it kind of makes
Yeah.
sense.
Are there going to be keybinds for each of the directions?
There
Like,
are, so that's
yeah.
another thing that has been a little insane, but it's pretty cool. Like all the control schemes, there's keybinds, there's mouse where you drag and then click, there's mouse where you click and then drag, there's mouse where you have a constant indicator showing you like your last mouse movement, there's mouse where it waits until you drag, is what I mean by that.
Yeah.
They're all completely overloadable, so you can be like, I mouse block, but I also middle button does down, but also if I'm moving forward, then middle button blocks up. Like you
Hmm.
can layer everything on top of itself. And I worked pretty hard to be like, if you've played any slasher seriously, one of these is gonna feel like what you played before. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't, like tell me, and then I'm gonna add that in. Like I feel like for these games to feel good, the sword just has to feel like part of you. And if there's like a block to that, and I can remove it as a developer, like that's one of the things I'm most excited to work on.
Hmm.
That's so awesome to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important, the user experience. There's
Yeah,
so
no,
many
I'm a
different
huge fan of stuff.
styles, and trying to bring everyone together. When Dark and Darker came out, everyone was like, "Oh, if there was something like this, but with Shiv combat," or like. So I'm glad there's somebody out there
If that's
kind of working on it.
that's what
Um,
I'm shooting for.
cool. Let's see. Do you have anything else, Strida, while I look through my questions? Um,
No, I think we've come to a lot of stuff. I think we've learned a tremendous amount too. I mean, to me, it's so awesome when we get a dev on because you can just the passion of the game and the genre. You get such great discussion. And you said Mortal Online was like the main inspiration for you here.
Mortal Online, Gloria Victis. I got to give a huge shout out to Ashron's Call. One, they like it was the first skill-based PvP combat MMO, even though it was mostly a bug that let it be so skill-based. Um, and then Guild Wars 1, but yeah, and certainly like I don't want to leave out Mordhau. Mordhau is the best at what it does in its own dimension. I think like it wasn't my favorite game, but I appreciate like it's really well put together. If that's what you want, it's really good. And Shiv 1, I mean, I played them all and they've all influenced me, but I think at a very high level, I had a few moments in Mortal that were just like 10 of 10 moments, and then a lot that wasn't. And I was like, what if it was just that? What if there's
yeah.
a game where like you cut out the rest? That is certainly a fair assessment that Mortal was
Mhm.
No,
a big
that's
inspiration.
that's
that way.
awesome to hear. That's awesome to hear. I mean, we're always so excited to get new games in the genre and to speak to people who are as passionate as Scotty and I are about playing the sword games. And are you working on the game alone, or do you have a team?
I pretty much had been working alone until quite recently. Certainly, I want to give a shout out like a bunch of my guildmates from Gloria Victis and Mortal and a few other games help me test and give feedback and stuff. And that's not like working on the game, but it is incredibly helpful, and I'd be lost without them. So I don't want to downplay their contribution. But then more recently, one of the new dungeons is also been designed by a guy who I started working with. So we're going to kind of see how that goes. The dungeon's going to go in the next playtest. But I love making like awesome epic dungeons, but it's insanely time consuming, and just like the amount of time you spend like, oh, maybe a cobweb here, like, oh, maybe the wall needs something
Yeah,
hanging on
yeah.
it
You
because it
need
looks so
another
bland.
guy that
I need someone
can.
to do that so that I like, because otherwise I can't build out just like the abilities and the combat and the loot. Like, it's so much work for one person. So it's mostly been a solo effort up to here, but I'm not like that's just the way it's been. I'd love to have more help, and I've already kind of got one person, and his level looks fantastic. I think you don't know exactly how it plays until you play it, but when I looked at it, I was like, I had kind of told him I wanted something that felt like a little bit of the ice wall from Game of Thrones, a little bit of like mist and smoke and undead, but also with a bit more of like a Eastern kind of feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
And he nailed it. The map looks amazing. It's actually ridiculous.
Awesome.
No, that's awesome to hear. And we were talking before the cast. You got to take me and Scotty through the dungeon sometime.
I am totally
when you're
in.
having one of the play tests and show us the ropes a little bit.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a playtest next Friday. It starts Friday through Sunday. You guys
Okay.
want to pick it?
All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Can you send me the links to all the stuff that you're gonna have so that I can put them?
Yeah, I was
below
just
in the
gonna say,
description?
what's the best way to keep in touch with the game, with the development? I guess Discord, probably Twitter.
There's kind of two. I'd say there's two options that are probably the best bet. One is if you want more of like in depth. You're a super fan. You want to hear everything. Join the Discord. I answer. I can't guarantee this forever, but for now, all the game's small. I answer literally every question. If you have any question, I answer it. And I am happy to give people playtest keys if they just ask. Like, you don't have to do anything. You have to be a huge streamer. You just say, I'd like to try it, and I'll be sure. My only request is that you give me some feedback. If you want more of a low touch, like you want to hear when it launches, you want to hear when there's major playtests, but you don't want to be involved in nitty gritty, then I would go to Steam and click follow. That means you get notifications when there's a major update. And then you can click request access, and that means when a big playtest comes out, I let everyone in the Steam queue in, and all at once, and you'll get an email when that happens, and then you just click and go play, and everything's free. So,
Awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, brother. It was a great time talking some slashers, and as I said, hopefully we can link up soon and get some games in. But we appreciate you coming down, spending your time with us, telling us about the game.
thank you guys so much for having me. This was awesome.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen.
All right.
All right.
See you guys.
Peace out, boys.
Thank you.
Much love.